Hello, this lecture is going to be about health promotion in the school-age child. So school-age children are in Erikson's stage of industry versus inferiority, and this is a relatively calm period between early childhood and adolescence, where children begin to form more independent relationship with peers, and they generally like to please others by accomplishing and completing assigned tasks. They're very eager to develop skills and competence of their own. And then by doing this, they can feel important and special. It also helps them to feel like they're contributing to their family, to society, or to their groups. Children are really not able to develop the sense of industry that they're tasked with in this phase if they are at risk for feeling inferior. With that said, some degree of inferiority is normal in this age group when they're encountering new skills that they cannot master, but it is really important to provide them with the opportunity and support to master those new skills. Household chores are a great way to develop a sense of industry in this age group. They are very eager to develop those skills and participate in meaningful work. And then this segues really well into the next example, which is school-age children are also able to understand working as a group and the division of labor. So whereas previously we talked about them having parallel play in toddlerhood and some interwoven play in the preschool age, now they really understand the concept and the ability to divide labor and conquer a project. So group tasks and projects are great ways for them to explore these new concepts. Concrete operations is defined as when children are able to use thought processes to experience events and actions. So the more rigid views during those younger years is now replaced with the ability to see them from someone else's point of view. They begin to understand the relationships between things and the ideas, and they are increasingly able to use past experiences to evaluate those new experiences. One task of this age group is conservation, such as the conservation of number or mass, liquids, and weights. Reading is also a new skill during this time, and it's very important for the school-age child. They also like to classify things. So children of this age group often have collections of various items that they will classify and organize. My two kids both have an insane collection of Pokemon cards, which absolutely validates this idea. They're all over their floor. Although I will say my 10-year-old is a little more organized. She has them grouped by color and in a binder, whereas my 8-year-old still just kind of has them strewn all over the place. So even in between those two age groups, you can see the change of how they go from classifying and categorizing in a very broad sense to actually being much more particular in how they do it. So here's a few examples of cognitive development in the concrete operations stage. So conservation, like I mentioned, in this stage of development, children will understand that when you have a glass of a liquid that's in a tall, skinny glass and you pour it into a shorter glass, that the amount of liquid has not changed. The younger child, though, would tell you that the taller glass has more and the shorter glass has less. They also go through what is defined as classification and decentralization. So the picture of the flowers here is a good example of this. If I asked a 6 or 7-year-old, are there more pink flowers or flowers? They would be able to classify the differences between the pink flowers and all of them and be able to tell me that there's more flowers altogether than just pink flowers, whereas a younger child would only be able to classify them by color. They can start using different classifications as well to help them understand questions and concepts. Reading is something that's learned during this stage and provides a lot of industry and independence to children as they're able to read instructions, read books, and be able to complete tasks on their own as they can read how to do them. And they also get a better concept of time relationships. So a good example of this is history, being able to understand that the Civil War happened however many years ago, and geography, right? That there are other places on the planet in countries outside of where they are and that they're different. So that's part of the reason why these concepts are introduced during this time frame and they aren't taught earlier in school. Moving on to social development, children in the school age are able to think outside of themselves. They've moved on from egocentrism and realize that there are other points of view than their own. Peer interactions are imperative for development in this age group because this is where they're really able to practice and to learn to bargain and argue and persuade their peers, because the dynamics of their relationship with their peers is very different from adult-child or parent-child relationships that they have at home. And so at home, the adults tend to have more power and more persuasion, but in peer interactions, they're able to really practice and own these skills, as well as understand the group dynamics that are associated with them. School-age children are also extremely sensitive to social norms and pressures from peer pressure. The strong need for peer relationships leads to a lot of clubs and groups in this age group. They're usually informal and based on common interests or behaviors. When I was in 4th grade, I was in a ghost club. There were like 5 of us, and we would just read books about ghosts and get together at lunch and talk about it. And then every so often we had like a play date where we walked around the neighborhood with a camera and we're taking pictures of scary houses. So very informal, but we all have that interest, and so that can be really prevalent. We start to see bullying more because of the need to be in a group. There's been a lot of work in recent years in schools to dismantle bullying, to really address it, and to empower parents and teachers and other kids to change the culture surrounding it. But bullying is really important to be aware of. It can really have long-lasting effects on the child, and so we'll touch on this a bit more in the adolescent lecture. This is still an age where we talk about playing a lot. It is still very important. For the school-age child, rules rule. If you've ever played a board game or participated in an activity with this age of child, you will understand how important rules are to them. They are able now to understand the reasoning for the rules and why they exist, and so then the rules become very rigid for them, even if the rules are made up. And so as a parent, I can vouch that this is the hardest. Team sports as well become more popular during this age because their physical skills develop to a point that they can begin to play more complex games like soccer or football, as well as their ability to understand how to apply the rules and how to apply more complex thoughts around strategy. So team sports become important, and it also plays into that need to belong and that team and group aspect that children in this age group really crave. It's also obviously a great way to get exercise. Learn about strategizing, goal setting. I could go on and on about the positive aspects of team sports, but they do come into play, especially in the American culture. Same-sex friendships are more common until early adolescence, when we start to see more friends of the opposite sex. Board games are really popular during this age, and also video games. Video games are a special category because they provide rigid rules and boundaries that kids can practice against with really low stakes, unlike in real life. And so it allows them to experiment with cause and effect and see what they can get away with without the consequences of real life behaviors. And so this can be addicting, but it also has benefits, so moderation is key. And again, collections due to that categorization and classification that I mentioned before. Biologic development refers to how their bodies change. So these are just some basic overviews. Children are really continuing to grow throughout childhood, but slower than in earlier periods of development. Movements during this age become more graceful and smooth, and they also lose and change their facial appearance. So they lose that round, younger toddler appearance, and their face proportion changes. So they begin to look a lot more adult and older. They also start to lose their baby teeth, and that's a huge part of this age group, as adult teeth begin to come in very quickly. At this point in development, the heart is smaller in relation to the rest of the body than it will be at any other time in development, and their heart rate and respiratory rate actually start to decrease to approach adult norms. Their immune systems become a little bit more effective, and their bones will continue to ossify. Physical maturity is not really correlated with emotional social maturity. This is important to remember. So you will sometimes encounter children in like that 4th and 5th grade age that look very adult and may even begin to have some development of secondary sex characteristics, but that does not mean that they are emotionally as mature as their bodies look. So it's always important to remember that their emotional and social maturity is how you should interact with them, and not base it on their physical maturity. We'll talk a bit more about puberty when we talk about adolescence. Puberty usually happens between 11 to 13 years of age, but prepubescence varies between 9 and 12. It's usually earlier in girls than in boys. So puberty, we would say, begins around 10 in females and 12 in males. So moving on to nutrition. Nutrition is really important in peds, as healthy habits are more successful when they start in childhood rather than changing behaviors in adulthood. So parents should continue to model healthy eating and offer balanced meals, encourage water over sugary beverages, and make sure kids are having a nutritious breakfast and lunch. However, food insecurity affects 10.3% of children aged 6 to 12, and about 20.7% of children are obese, which highlights the significant dietary challenges in this age group. So this age group begins to notice their bodies more, and about 40 to 50% of school-aged children express body dissatisfaction. So you can imagine how obesity may play a role here. Comments from peers, family, and adults will significantly influence a child's body image, so nurses need effective communication skills to address those questions and concerns that a child might have about their physical changes. Obviously, prevention of obesity is ideal, but not always attainable. So when treating obesity in children, we try to focus on no further weight gain, and the idea behind that being that as the child grows, then the weight proportions will begin to correct themselves. So as mentioned, prevention is obviously best, and it begins as early as infancy with educating families about dietary goals, encouraging physical activity, and avoiding sugars. Families that sit down to meals together have more success, but this is obviously very culturally and socioeconomically dependent. When we are addressing obesity in children, it's much more realistic to have families change 1 or 2 behaviors at first in order to be successful. Too much change at once will just become a barrier, and you won't see a whole lot of follow through or success with that approach. So a nurse's role in education should be providing information on healthy eating practices that will align with a family's financial resources, and also providing information about nutritional assistance programs that are aimed at reducing food insecurity among families. So as I mentioned before, treatment will focus on weight maintenance as long as there are no other complications. If there are, we're then going to pivot to weight loss. This weight maintenance approach will allow the child to continue to grow in size, let their proportions even out, and then once they are over 6, we can consider weight loss treatments. Although personally, that still seems a little young. Kids are still growing pretty quickly at that point, and then over 12, they can start to utilize weight loss medications if necessary. So these kids still sleep a lot, 9 to 12 hours a night. Adequate sleep in this age group allows for growth, reduces the risk of obesity because hormonal imbalances can increase appetite. It helps prevent diabetes, attention and behavior problems, poor mental health, and injuries in children. Parents can promote better sleep by establishing consistent sleep and wake times, encouraging physical activity during the day, avoiding heavy meals or caffeine before bedtime. Most relevant right now is removing electronics from the bedroom and keeping the sleep environment dark and quiet. They should also be off those electronics at least an hour before bedtime. And then media exposure would be another typical concern for this age group, tying into the screen time here, not only because of how sedentary it is, but because modern access to personal screens and internet and social media and targeted videos will create a much more complex health problem for these kids. Children need supervision and rules around media, especially in this age group. I'm sure you are all aware of how easy it is to feel addicted to our screens. And then third, dishonest behavior will also begin around this stage, and this can be really concerning for parents. Oftentimes, this is developmentally normal. These kids are learning to push boundaries to see where the rules are and how they can manipulate them. However, if this behavior begins to cause harm, then it's important to intervene before it becomes a bigger problem. School-age children are at the highest risk for bicycle accidents and should always wear helmets and use active lighting if riding at night. Car and bus safety is also still important, as a lot of these children are beginning to maybe go to the bus stop alone or ride with other families rather than in their own cars. So we have to provide proper education on seatbelt restraint. I'm sure that you've all been to a trampoline park or two. Trampoline accidents are freakishly common. School-aged kids are at high risk for injury due to their high energy and their lack of awareness of safety. I personally, as a parent, despise trampoline parks. I mean, they look really, really fun, but the few times that I have taken my kids there, I have just been on edge the whole time. And I'm sure you've heard also the danger of trampolines in yards and things like that. They cause lots of injuries. As mentioned in the previous slide, the internet is incredibly detrimental to children's mental health, sleep, and attention. Clear expectations should be communicated, safeguards put in place, and internet safety taught from a young age. And then firearms do remain the leading cause of death among children in the U.S. and have surpassed motor vehicle accidents, which was number one for a very long time, over the last 5 years. So if guns are kept at home, they should be locked away with the ammunition stored separately. A significant number of unintentional shootings occur in the homes of friends, neighbors, and relatives. So to kind of wrap this up, we're going to talk about ADHD for a minute. This is commonly diagnosed in these school age years. So symptoms will typically begin before age 12. They can be seen as early as 3, but I believe the average age of diagnosis is at around 7, which coincides with children beginning school and allowing for a year or two of observation by parents and teachers in that environment. Because symptoms can resemble other conditions like anxiety or stress or sleep disorders, a thorough evaluation is necessary for an accurate diagnosis. Treatments for ADHD can include medication, behavior therapy, and educational services such as IEPs or 504s at the school settings to provide accommodations for these kids. Some common accommodations would include things like frequent rest breaks, fidgets, maybe extra time on tests, or even breaking up tests into smaller chunks, minimizing distractions, offering different ways to complete tasks, things like that. Children who go undiagnosed can face academic or social challenges as they go through school. And overall, there are lots of different management techniques and different approaches to ADHD. So this concludes our school age lecture. Have a great day.